Hello, hello. We are getting ready to go. It's good to be here. Good to have you joining us. This is our first session, the church and social impact. If you'll give us one moment. All right. Nora, I believe you are promoted to a panelist now at this point. Welcome, everybody. Good to have you. Welcome to the first session of the Sense Seminar. We're really excited to have you and to hear from Reverend Nora Jacob. She will be walking us through some content on the church and social impact. So we're very grateful for her. I will have some announcements at the end, but we want to reserve much of the time to Reverend Jacob. We'll also be engaging in some Q&A, so be thoughtful about any questions or ideas that you would like to share and invite Reverend Jacob to respond. We'll be doing that at the end of her presentation, and the questions will be provided in the chat function. But without further ado, I'll hand it over to Reverend Nora Jacob and invite you to take the mic.
Thank you so much. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on what time zone you're in. It's very nice to be here, and I thank NBA for this opportunity to share about the church and social change and what we as social entrepreneurs can do. I speak in big terms, what we can do to stand for something, to change the world. So I'd like to share my screen so that you can also see my PowerPoint here. So does that work for you? Yes, good. All right. So the title or the focus of this presentation is on the church and social impact, but I call it standing for something because I'm so inspired by Rosa Parks and how she stepped forward to stand for something. And so I am Reverend Nora Jacob from Community Partners for Innovation, formerly known as Urban Mission Community Partners. And here's what Rosa Parks said: "Stand for something, or you will fall for anything. Today's mighty oak is yesterday's nut that held its ground." Think especially today, we are struggling with sorting out how we as the church and as individuals who represent the best, the most innovative, the most entrepreneurial of what church and faith-filled people can be, how we can be a more effective force for positive change. So I'll be looking at some values and practices and asking you to look and think about yourself and the congregation or community in which you are a leader as we go through all of this. How do we want the church to change? Well, what can we control? And especially during this time of COVID-19, what is out of our control? I'm going to give you a moment to think first about what is out of our control. Certainly COVID-19 and all of the restrictions on gatherings, the ripple effect of an economy that's challenged, of people who are struggling not only with their personal health, but with their social relationships in this time. The world has changed profoundly. I don't need to go on about that, but it does raise a really profound question, which is, what can we control? That has always been a question, always will be a question. And so as we go through this presentation, that's where I'd like you to land as we talk. The other question is, how do you want yourself to change? Again, what's out of our personal control? What can we control? I'll tell you, I'm not big on technology. I'm big on person to person. And so this COVID-19 shift has given me some challenges, and part of me feels out of control still, doing not Zoom so much, but some of the other platforms that are developing. And what can we control? Well, guess what? I'm on a steeper learning curve now, trying to learn how to do these things so that I can stay in touch. So that's one doing thing. But how can we control who we are, who we want to be, who we are called to be as God's people, and as people with imaginations who don't just see what is, but who see what can be? Community Partners for Innovation has adopted this new, really brand new name because we realized that our board of directors love this idea of innovation, not of doingness. We're not doing magical new things that nobody has ever done before, but we're innovating in ways that we're seeing that others haven't. And so that's really the purpose of my sharing today, is to encourage you to think about ways that you yourself and you, the church, you, your social enterprise, can think about how you will stand for something and how you can find more clearly what that something is that you want to stand for, that you want to be, not just to do. For myself, here is the way I often introduce myself. I am a restorative justice facilitator who believes in the power of community, diversity, and collaboration to bring God's kingdom more fully on earth as it is in heaven. And I often use a scripture along with that, especially if I'm doing it in writing. And right now, I'm over there in the book of Acts, and Peter said, this is after that wonderful image of the curtain dropping down, filled with strange beings and creatures. I really am learning that God doesn't show partiality to one group of people over another. This is an invitation to us as people of faith who are also social entrepreneurs to think differently about those around us, to think of everyone, if we're thinking in a circle, which is what restorative justice brings to us, and facilitating, not telling or teaching or doing for someone. Notice the hand emotions, which I can't stop at this point. We're not doing this, we're doing this. We're coming together in a circle, and that's restorative justice and restorative practices. I believe in the power of community. No matter how strong any one of us is, we are stronger together. Diversity, because God doesn't show partiality to one group of people over another. In fact, God made us all, and made us all not just good, but looked at the end at what God created and said that it is all very good. And so that's the basis for me of diversity, that we all have many ways in which we connect with one another, and some of them at least involve being different from one another. And collaboration, which means the more dynamic part of being in community, not just that we all show up at the same place at the same time, do the same thing and say we are a community of faith, but that we then take that connection and collaborate to carry out how we stand for something, carrying God into the world, carrying the message of Jesus into the world, living at one with the Holy Spirit in the world. And so for me, that always means my why. The why is to bring God's kingdom more fully on earth as it is in heaven, from the Lord's Prayer. So here's my first question to you. How would you describe yourself? what would that one sentence with 3 parts be? Who are you? What do you identify with and why? For this moment in time, what is that one verse of our sacred text that calls to you to define yourself? How would you describe yourself? I'm going to stop for a moment and see whether there's any opportunity for question and answer in here at this moment. The one person whose face I see is Ashley's. And so I don't know, Ashley, if you want to stand in for everyone else so that this can be a little interactive, because that might be kind of a fun experience. Would you be up for that?
Absolutely. And again, I want to encourage if we want some other voices, and I'm happy to reflect back any questions or feedback that our participants and attendees have. You can input those into the chat function, and we can engage in that way as well.
Good. So thank you, because for me it's very odd doing this part and not having a real human being or tend to interact with. So thank you for letting me put you on the spot without advance notice. So how would you describe your who, your what, and your why? Can be rough because you have had no notice.
Yeah. Who I know myself to be is someone who speaks truth and who cultivates healing, holistic healing. What the domain, I guess, that I imagine myself to do this in the world, is in the church, and yet on the margins, and to serve as kind of a liaison in challenging those who are comfortable within the walls and the structures of the church to move outward, and to get uncomfortable, because we recognize that the healing and the work of the gospel, what I see in the person of Jesus, was that his ministry was holistic. It dealt with our bodies. It dealt with relationships. It dealt with pushing against structures. And so just like starting conversations within the church around this kind of holistic healing and seeing that as sacred and good and holy. And why, I mean, again, I see that's my understanding of the good news. That's what I saw lived out in the person of Jesus. But I guess the why and the scripture that go hand in hand for me is 2 Corinthians 5, where we hear that God's ministry of reconciliation, the whole purpose of God's work in the world throughout time, is that we are on this trajectory towards shalom, or wholeness. And my understanding of that is decidedly holistic. That wholeness isn't just a heady, overly spiritualized idea. But I don't know. Maybe that's a little too verbose, but that's what comes to my mind.
That's beautiful. Thank you very much for sharing it, because as you were speaking, I was kind of filling in the space there on that open whiteness that asks who, what, why, and then your scripture verse. And I'm hoping that those who watch this presentation will have a pad of paper beside them and will be jotting notes along. So we're going to be pausing a little bit in these questions, so that those at home can do it in real time. So hopefully that's what you all watching have been doing, and at least to put the outline down and start making notes on it. So thank you so much. So that's yourself. Then the question is, how would you describe your church, or or your faith community, or your organization, for those of us who are in faith-rooted organizations that work for social justice or social change. Same questions pertain: the who, the what, the why, and a scripture verse. So I would say this is very much Community Partners for Innovation's mission statement. This is actually the language that leads us into a mission statement, that we are a social organization, social justice organization, excuse me, that seeks wholeness, resilience, and sustainability throughout the Pomona Valley and beyond, with families and individuals who are affected by poverty, hunger, incarceration, homelessness, and or inadequate health care or education. That's a mouthful. It's a doingful as well. It also gives you the sense that we are holistic. We're not focusing on something narrow. We're looking at a broader picture. Legally, and this is important to us as organized churches as well as nonprofit organizations, legally it gives us something to point back to when we start a new service, or why somebody says, now remind me, Nora, you work in prison, I thought, so why are you working with a group of prison officials to find housing for LGBTQ trans women who are about to parole? Why do you do that? And I can point back to our mission statement and say, this is why. These are part of the humanness that our organization and I are called to serve and to walk with. So that's helpful. So again, Ashley, do you want to give this a try for yourself?
Well, I have a apology for the background. I do have a question for those who find themselves in a position of maybe that middle component, the what, is hard to identify. Do you have any insight for us in identifying where, what domain, what field, what problem or issue or need we can be drawn to, and do you have any wisdom or idea in how to identify that or put language to that for someone who maybe isn't quite sure where to land with that?
Yes, I would say, first of all, the how to process would be simply to brainstorm what calls to you without judgment and just let her rip. It's easier to, for me, it's easier to do with others, but only a few others who want to do the same thing. So you kick all that around. And then to see what calls out from that. There's the what in terms of what services, but there's also the what in terms of what geographical area or what community, broadly speaking. The only biggest thing that I would say would be keep it broad. So this revisioning is at the 10,000 foot level. It's what you march around to every day. It's what you say in an elevator speech. I don't talk fast anyway. And so talking slowly through the different kinds of challenges that Community Partners takes on, the different kinds of healing that we want to be part of, whether it's incarceration or homelessness or hunger, which is enormous and growing in our community. It's important to find that big picture story and to stay away from negativity. So don't spend your time saying what you don't want to do. Don't spend your time saying who you are not. Don't spend your time refusing, for that matter, but find the words that say the who, what, and why. And NBA is a great resource if you would like help brainstorming, because there are some of us who do coaching and one-on-ones if you get stuck on that. But I think that the place to start is within your own community of like-minded persons. Start with yourself and with like-minded persons. Yeah. Does that help, Ashley?
It does. I'm curious too, when we think about your current slide about this going beyond just us and our personal sense of calling or vocation, and we zoom out to the church in our communities, how do we go about unifying ourselves in our efforts collaboratively when there might be different whats? Does that make sense?
It does, and we will be talking about that in a little while. May I put that question on pause?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. Great. It's nice to have people who are resonating here. Okay, so let's go on and say, so that was your church. Let's talk about values now, your personal values to start with. Mine, just to sort of start, I brainstorm this a lot because sometimes I lose my balance on some of them. Sometimes I get shifted off my center point. And so in really no particular order, mine are respect for others, everyone, and everyone means everyone. Everyone means sitting in a restorative justice circle with people who have been incarcerated for major harm, or respect for people who walk in off the street because they're hungry and they may smell, they may have dirty clothes, and they are God's children. That's respect to me. Compassion goes with it. Compassion is the being present with, feeling with. Love of God, self, and neighbors. We know this as the greatest commandment and the commandment that goes with. The platinum rule. I hope we've all learned the golden rule, which is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The platinum rule, I'm not even sure where I first heard this, but listen to the difference. Do unto others as they would have you do unto them. So it's not about what you want, which puts your lens on what's about to happen, but about trying to understand and see the world through their lens. And it means always asking open-ended questions, avoiding yes or no questions, instead of saying, can I give you this? Let me give you this. Saying, how can I help you? What might you need? Is there anything I can answer for you? Those invite a fuller answer than a yes or a no, because yes takes us back to the golden rule. I'm going to do for you what I would want you to do for me, or my best guess. And if there's anything in these conversations about privilege, it is how profoundly many of us, especially those of us who are white, don't fully understand what others have been through and the way they see the same world we think we see, and it's not the same world. And so the platinum rule is where I try to land. The creative power of chaos and flexibility. I know there's a breaking point for every human. And I know that COVID-19, we're in this time of time blurring. That said, chaos can be the most productive thing because it disrupts us. And when we're disrupted, watch as you're being disrupted, hold a part of yourself separate to watch how you're reacting so you can say, well, when someone offered to call me on the phone and talk to me for 10 minutes, I loved that. When somebody sent me a card in the mail out of nowhere and suggested that I do such and such or have this thought, that's because they were picking up on the fact that I was feeling chaotic. And if you're in an organization where things feel chaotic, people coming and going, money coming and going, resources coming and going, chaos can feel overwhelming. But when we turn it into thinking of it as flexibility, we're developing a whole new set of muscles, right? And those are muscles that stand us in good stead, especially in a time such as this. My last two values are integrity and faith. I hope that those are self-explanatory. To me, integrity is speaking the truth in love. Faith is knowing that God is there with me, even in the darkest times, and all the rest that goes with having God in my life and having others in my life, because I also believe that each of us has a spark of God within us. So here's the next question. List up to 7 of your most strongly held values. Ashley, have you, as I've been speaking, have you been thinking about this?
I've been actively listening, but I feel like I can pretty quickly list off, I don't know if 7 right off the top of my head, but what I know of myself is that I value authenticity, which I guess presupposes a sense of safety or candidness.
Mm-hmm.
I value compassion. I value reciprocity.
Mm-hmm.
I value equity, not just equality, but equity.
Yes.
I'm not counting, so I don't know how many that is.
But that's a beautiful start. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. So it's the reason I said 7 is that my experience is that people are clear about the first few, but 7 is, first of all, it's a prime number, and it's a powerful one for me. It makes each of us dig a little deeper. So I invite all of you who are doing this practice as we go along to come back here and think about the rest of your strongly held values, and to come back about once a quarter to see whether there's something else that has come in and either reframes one of your values or replaces it and moves that one down one step so that it drops off the list. Because we hold many values strongly. So yeah, thank you. And then here's the corollary for your church, your faith organization, your social justice organization, or social enterprise. For that organization, so this is an organizational question, what are some of the most strongly held values? I would say for Community Partners for Innovation, the one word that everybody on the board of directors, the staff, everybody agreed on needed to be there was partners. And right next to that was community. And so those are two of our organization's most strongly held values. And innovation then came in because it says up front that we're open to not just to ideas, but to everything. And so within the context of our mission statement, our who, what, and why. So I invite you all to do that. And I don't know if you want to give that a try, actually, for whatever organization you would identify with for this exercise.
Well, this is one of those moments where I'm a language person. And so I don't say that in the sense that I get caught up in it. I say it in the sense that language is important. And so when we share the value of like community, for example, I think it invites a really important and big conversation around like how we understand what communities look like. Because even for myself personally, when I named authenticity, I know that safety, or I would say maybe a sense of belonging, is a prerequisite. People don't feel free to be authentic, to be vulnerable, to be honest with the most precious of things, or to be their true selves, if they are at risk of not experiencing belonging in light of that. Anyways, so when I think about the value of compassion, in a communal sense, in a organizational sense, to me that necessitates that people have a capacity to see each other's humanity and to step outside of themselves, enough to honor the reality and the truth of those whom they are listening to. We have a handful of comments here. Mark Palmer, he said that he values integrity, character, faith, respect, commitment, honesty. Amy says that honesty, vulnerability, compassion, non-judgment, flexibility, equity, justice. So we have a handful. Some are overlapping for sure, the honesty piece.
And that authenticity, vulnerability, integrity, they're all in the same family. They mean different things. I hear you about the importance of language and being clear. Well, thank you, Mark. Thank you, Amy. Yeah.
Terrell asks a good question. He says, how does an organization be honest?
An organization is honest. That is a good question. An organization is honest. I think of the word transparency. So an organization is honest in how it operates as an organizationally with its finances and the safeguards of its finances and the reporting and oversight, so that no one person holds all the information, because that's an invitation to potential challenges. An organization is honest within its members by good communication, and communication that is appropriate for the persons receiving the communication and for those with whom it might be shared. We live in a tricky world because email, social media makes very little truly private should anyone wish to share that information. So doing regular updates for those in your governing circle of your organization is very important. Of the things that are difficult, staying in touch with those who can be supporting and advising you on difficulties and challenges is also really important. Silence is often an obstacle to healthy relationship within an organization. Does that help? Would anyone like to offer anything further here in terms of being honest within an organization? I guess I just have talked within the organization. In terms of the public, I think it comes to very carefully minding that anything we put onto social media, in particular at the Instagram or Facebook level, also website and so on, but all of that, to be mindful that sometimes it can be taken out of context, not just our words, but our photographs. We'll be talking about that in a little bit.
So one quick question that I think is interesting from Sandy. She says that you can be honest to your values, but honesty can also be subjective. Thoughts on that?
That's interesting. Yes, so honesty can be subjective. Sandy, can you say a little bit more about that so I understand that more clearly?
Let me see if I can give speaking abilities.
I'm wondering if that's cultural sensitivity, if it's good, Sandy.
Yes, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thanks very much. I'm interested. What does that mean to you?
Well, I sense it from the standpoint of the honesty that we have, or that I may have. Our truths may not be the same. And so if it aligns with your core values of your personal core values or the values of your organization, that's a way to maintain consistency within an organization. But I still think we can walk away with different subjective views of what that honesty and truth is. Does that make sense?
Yes, it totally does. Thank you. It does. And I think that the way to get more deeply to that is for one whose perception of honesty is different from another's, to ask, or that's not what I mean, to say, my perception of this is different from yours. And if it's possible then to have a conversation about that. I'm thinking in terms of being white and not wanting to put the burden of my ignorance and privilege onto anybody else but myself. So I have been trying to frame how to ask others when my honesty may be different from the honesty that what they're perceiving as honesty. Does that help?
Took away Sandy's speaking.
Okay.
She says yes. We have a couple of other comments here. Amber Mattingly says that she had a professor who spoke about honesty as wise transparency, being mindful about how our honesty can impact people's lives in ways that may pose a serious challenge. Terrell also says being honest includes expressing what you do not value.
Yeah.
And one more, transparency, organizational transparency is not only being honest, but moreover using facts when speaking publicly.
That's interesting. Yes. Yes to all of it. Thank you. Thank you, all of you participants. Yeah. So I'm going to move on and note that roles and titles, sometimes we get caught up in them. I never lead with this. I have a bunch of roles and titles, and my strong guess is that you do too. And so you can see that most of mine are connected to restorative justice, reentry, restorative practice, practice of peace, coaching. And I'm curious if you have thought about yourself the same. What I'm building toward is an understanding of us as adaptive and collaborative. We have to have linkage points beyond simply our faith and our faith practice. And so if we stay within our denomination, if we stay within the flavor of our denomination, whether that's progressive or liberal or however people describe it, I think that we're not providing as many connection points for ourselves or for our organizations or for the world to connect to us. Because that's ultimately what I think as social entrepreneurs we need to be aware of always. Who are we connecting with? Why does that matter? Where does this fit, and how might this relationship grow? If there's any one thing I would say about roles and titles, it's that they become transactional very easily. And I put them aside. I usually introduce myself as Nora or Pastor Nora because I want to provide more opportunities for people to connect with me. But there are some people who don't feel comfortable doing that until they find a little more detail. So I invite you just to self-inventory, and same thing for your organization or church, to do the same and to find out what you identify. I'm going to move on because I want to get to the importance of language and visioning. This is about how partnering is powerful, whether it's church partnering or social enterprise partnering. These are some possible assets. And so assessing your assets. This is also kind of a trick slide, because there are at least 2 bullets that to me are even more important than this in assessing ourselves, our organizations. What do you think is missing? This is often how we think. We think about the things. We don't talk about the staff. We don't talk about congregation members or the people with whom we walk as being assets. We take that for granted, but I had a very powerful experience just this weekend, actually the last 9 months, with the Pomona Fellowship of the Brethren, a group that is in its 4th quadrant of life as a congregation. And they've determined to sell their church and their land and move into a neighborhood, the neighborhood where Community Partners for Innovation works in South Central Pomona. And there are like 30 of them. And they realize that they are the asset and that partnering and collaborating is where they want to go. Partnering not just with us, our faith-rooted organization, but with the people in the neighborhood they'll be moving into. And so we've had a lot of conversations about how do we build those neighbor relationships? How do we get to know our neighbors and have our neighbors get to know us? And so in doing that, not just who's underserved, who's not being served, but what services are already going on? Where can we find points of connection? So, yeah.
Mimi made a good addition. She said an asset is what people can do for themselves on top of their needs.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you so much. It's exactly so. So, leveraging those assets, what can we do for ourselves, for our organizations, for our churches? We can reach out to other faith communities, service organizations, neighbors. We can start learning through what we can find out about online in terms of facts. There's a ton of information out there about hunger in Pomona. I think if there's any one challenge that community faces, it's hunger. Hunger caused by poverty, caused by generational poverty and unemployment, but it comes out. So all of those are connection points. All the organizations and communities that are involved in the services to address those needs are connection points for us. And notice and wonder, are their values shared? Are there services in common? What's missing? Is there interest in collaboration? Not as full-fledged, say, as the Pomona Fellowship of the Brethren has with Community Partners for Innovation, but one thing, can we do a restorative justice reading group together? And then what do we do with that? Can we share in how we provide food and make food available to those who are hungry in the community? And then is there interest in partnering? And then the supportive mechanisms, which are usually written documents of collaboration, memorandums of understanding and that stuff, to make that happen. And finally, I would ask to find your risk level, which I prefer language-wise to comfort zone. How much in common must there be? What values are most important to both of us? The Brethren and Community Partners for Innovation, you know where we connected? We connected around the Brethren's central practice and value of the love feast. I'm a disciples ordained pastor. What's central for me? Communion is very central for me. And so that instantly like took the relationship a big step ahead. Stay positive. Try to keep away from bashing what's not, what shouldn't be, whatever, and stay positive. Start small, because small steps lead to more positive feelings about next steps. But stay open to big surprises. We've had our share of those at Community Partners. Honestly, the Pomona Fellowship of the Brethren is one of them. And always pray and talk together before acting. This seems really obvious, but especially in COVID, when people are have different job responsibilities, unless we talk together regularly and pray together regularly and become vulnerable to one another regularly before we act, things can go off kilter. And finally, it's okay if things don't work out. Lessons learned are valuable. I don't know how else to say it. Our dominant culture at least says that failure is bad. And failure can be the best thing that ever happened because it provides the richest lessons, not always the most comfortable lessons, but gives you a sense of how much risk you were willing to take, gives you feedback on how you present to the world. It gives you a whole lot of other stuff. Ashley, I saw you actually nodding for that. Do you have thoughts about lessons learned if things don't work out?
I mean, I think it is a helpful, life-giving reframing, because that dominant culture message is certainly strong, and it's hard to battle that narrative without substituting a message that is more helpful, and that gives way to the next thing, and to growth and transformation. And I mean, it requires grief, and it doesn't negate that what was or what attempts were made were bad, or that they weren't good, that there was still goodness in it. But yeah.
Thank you. Reframing is one of my central awarenesses, constantly. Yep. So to move on here, I just want to show you some examples on a vision statement. Is a broadly, boldly declared statement of what a person or organization seeks to become and wants to do. And there's our DOC's vision. But I want to show you that this is something that a group of 8 of us from very different backgrounds in Pomona, all of us committed to restorative practices. This is, excuse me, what we came up with for our restorative justice, or our restorative practices collaborative, that our vision was to build a community in which restorative practices and transformative justice are a normal response to interpersonal relations, crime, civil unrest, catastrophe, or any kind of injustice. So keeping it big and boldly declared. And then kind of narrowing it down to the mission statement, which is a concise explanation of an organization's reason for existence. We did this at the beginning, describes the organization's purpose and intention, and identifies those it seeks to serve and or with whom it aligns. And then this is actually, for the DOC, it's interesting because this witnessing, loving, and serving from our doorsteps to the end of the earth is actually concise for an organization that is as broad as the disciples. Your organization is likely to be, may or may not be more concise. Here's what the Pomona Restorative Practices Collaborative did to develop and promote restorative practices and transformative justice in relationships and systems throughout our community. And that's already affecting what we're doing. And then finally, to remember that identifying organizational values are important. One's judgment of what's important in life. Organizations have values just as individuals do. And what we realized in our Restorative Practices Collaborative is that values can be goals like compassion, healing, authenticity, relationship building, reconciliation, transformation, or they can be tools. This is interesting. All I can say is this was the collaborative's way of dividing concepts up into goals and tools. So the tools, because these are the things we demonstrate, we practice respect, we practice empathy, we practice creating and holding safety, we practice personal accountability, we practice equity, collaboration, and trust. So that was about our words, our images. Our images here, because I know I'm low on time here. Just want to note that you're seeing the value of diversity, of groups, of shared work and practice together. And that's important because we're living in an increasingly visual world where one image, think about that, one image can make a huge difference. Think about how George Floyd changed the world. It's not that people weren't being killed by police before, but having that image in real time probably has defined our century. So you are a social entrepreneur, so it's time to share your story and vision, thinking new, thinking about breaking down silos, promoting partnerships, and who you will have for companions on your journey and where God will be, always asking that. And I want to end with this wonderful quote from Chimananda Adichie. I want to move this. I'm going to look over on my other screen. She says, the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. So it's helpful to know the gifts in your own story, personally, organizationally. Who is or are the people who will resonate with the gifts of your story, because they're the ones most likely to support you and partner with you in ways large and small. And to think about how your story can enrich others. It's not just us looking for partners, but it's for following where God is leading us into partnerships, right? To being open for that. So there are a couple of minutes for questions or observations, if we have time.
I think we can probably take one quick question. We are so grateful, Reverend Jacob, for your wisdom and sharing your experience, giving us the framework for that kind of innovative partnership and helping to identify how we understand ourselves, where we feel called, and why that's important. We're very grateful to you for your time. I'll allow for a question if someone wants to put that in the chat function, but I'll also provide a couple of announcements here really quickly. The first is that my email address and Darnell's email address, and then I'm also going to add our Zoom support. Will plug his email address in there as well. If you have any questions, please send us an email and we'll try to address those as quickly as possible. I have provided our working definition for social enterprise that Darnell offered in our opening session. And then to clarify things, that you'll see where it says Blackboard course invitation. If you've not yet created a username and account for yourself on Blackboard, we encourage you to do so, because the answer to your questions, the PowerPoint presentation, any course handouts that our presenters have developed ahead of time, they are already there on Blackboard, and so you can have access to those and read through them. And then the benefit, you'll notice that each session has 2 co-occurring presentations. So you're not able to literally attend every single presentation, but the video recordings will be posted there in the coming days. And so you'll be able to hop on Blackboard and you can watch those recordings at a later time. So do use that Blackboard link to create a username for yourself. And then the last announcement, as we said in our opening session, if you are currently doing social and enterprise work, or you have a firm idea for a social enterprise, we'd encourage you to submit an application to become part of our SENT cohort. And so that's a 12-month process, and that provides some community support and opportunities for coaching and just being encouraged in that work. And so you'll find that link there in the chat function as well. And it is without further ado that I say thank you. Thank you, Reverend Jacob. Our next session is in 30 minutes, and you'll want to refer back to that document that has all of the webinar links for whichever presentation you will be attending. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. See you.